Welcome to Moments of Clarity with Tiffany Werner, licensed mental health counselor in the state of Florida. Moments of Clarity's mission is to educate and end the stigma on mental health through the inspirational stories of our exceptional guests. You can join in the show by calling Tiffany toll-free at 866-826-1340 or on Facebook and Twitter at MOC with Tiffany. Now, here's Tiffany Werner.
Hi, welcome to Moments of Clarity. My name is Tiffany Werner. I'm a licensed mental health counselor, and I'm your host. And today, we have a special guest that's using her history of what she's gone through and her journey and where she's gotten to now in order to inspire and help others. Because sometimes really bad things happen to us, and how we react and how we handle them and how we cope with things is what really gets us through. And our story sometimes inspires others to know that there's always some way to get through things, even when they look as hopeless as they can. And I want to welcome to Moments of Clarity, a mental health advocate and very courageous young lady, Jennifer Knighton. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi there. How are you?
Hi. Welcome to Moments of Clarity. Thank you so much for being on the show and for sharing your journey. I know this is not easy for anyone to do.
No, it's not, and it hasn't been. It's been a long, tough journey, and I want to thank you for having me on your show this morning.
Thank you for being here.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start with the beginning. Go ahead.
Okay, so the beginning, I actually grew up in a small town, DeLand, Florida, probably about 20 miles east of Daytona Beach. And in my younger years, I remember being entered in beauty pageants and being a pretty outgoing child. By the age of 3, I had been molested by a 70-something-year-old man. And I want to say that even despite of that molestation, I still maintained happiness or inner peace. And my father passed away when I was really young, so I began experiencing the trauma from a very young age. But despite all of that, I still, this happy little girl. It wasn't until I was about 9 or 10 years old in elementary school that I started experiencing the adverse symptoms of the traumatic experiences that I had went through.
So you were in pageants. Let me just rephrase so I can get the whole story. And so when how long did your parents put you in beauty pageants? Because I know that's kind of significant to where you're going.
Probably about 2, 3 years I was in it. I remember.
Welcome to mid-Florida, Central Florida. Just saying.
I had to get out of Florida, though.
Don't blame me, but Central Florida, they're big on that kind of stuff. It's not on the coast so much, but just, yeah.
Yeah, but it was all, I want to say 2 to 3 years, but we hit it hard, and I won so many trophies. I won a lot of tiaras. I mean, I was really in it. And
so there's a lot of pressure on you on appearance and all that as well. And then, and then as a little girl, so how old were you when you were doing the pageants?
I want to say I started at about 2 or 3 years old.
So like elementary school, preschool kind of ages?
Even younger than that, because by the time I hit elementary school, I was actually done. I had been taken out. And
the molestation, was it a neighbor or who was that?
So it was a neighbor of ours, and this may be triggering for some individuals, but I remember we used to go over to his house, and we would play around his house, and we were all very close because we lived on the same street for probably about 15 to 20 years. But we'd go over to his house and play, and I remember when my mom found out, I was at his house and my brother came knocking on his door, and he wouldn't open the door. And my mom went my brother went running home screaming to my mom, "This guy's not opening the door, this guy's not opening the door." And he was charged with lewd and lascivious acts on a child, but he was not arrested. And
so it was reported, at least.
Mm-hmm. It was reported, but unfortunately, due to the flaws in the criminal justice system, he continued to molest many children after me. So I didn't really get any justice, even as a young child.
Is he still alive?
But he is deceased now. Yes, he is deceased. He when he molested
I was wondering. Sorry.
It was like 70 or 80 years old, but yeah, he's deceased now. And I found him when I was about 13 years old, and we went and put flyers all around the place where he was living. So that was the little bit of justice that I did get.
But good for you.
But,
good for you to not only save other people, but to stand up for yourself as well, and to protect other children that were getting harmed.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
we have to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So beauty
Going back
pageants
to the
and
system.
early sexual trauma can really do a damage.
My father, right, and the trauma of my father passing away was also. I mean, I grew up without a father, so the only father figure I had was the males in my life that molested me. So, going back to elementary school, was probably in the 4th or 5th grade, and I started experiencing physical symptoms of being sick, and I always wanted to miss school, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong with me, so they took me to Arnold Palmer, which they thought I had Crohn's disease, and later diagnosed me with being lactose intolerant, but I
Arnold
don't
Palmer,
agree with that
is that a treatment center? That's like a professional... Arnold Palmer Hospital is right there in Orlando, Florida. It's like one of the biggest children's hospitals. Okay.
Yeah, and so they concluded that I was lactose intolerant. But my grades continued to go down. I was failing. I just had a lot of adverse symptoms that weren't just. It was mental, but it was physical.
Right.
So I started experiencing the physical symptoms first, and nobody caught on. I was just this troubled little girl, and by the time I was in 5th grade, I just kept getting administrative passes, and my mental health declined. I can recall back from being that little girl of how bad off I was, and my self-esteem was really low. By the time I got up to 5th grade, I was just this lost child, and the schools, they just continued to pass me on from grade level to grade level.
And that was before you went around with the flyers about the pedophile and all that stuff. If you had done it when you were 13. So all of these symptoms and hospitalization and everything wasn't really... You hadn't reported it or found justice at that time.
Right.
Right? So you were like suffering in silence, so to speak.
Yes, absolutely. So by the time I hit
just want to aware, like, these symptoms are like obvious, like when our kids, like if they're afraid to tell or people are guilt or feel shamed to notice these symptoms. I mean, it's just alarming that, it's so easy to think it's a behavioral thing or that somebody's just sick or mentally ill or whatever when there's really just something else going on. And for
I think
us to be aware that to ask if everything's okay or to ask what's up is so important nowadays, not just assume that it's a behavioral issue. It's across the board all the time.
That's the struggle that the issues that there is that the lack of education or the ignorance on mental health, it just causes a very big problem for individuals that are suffering. I mean,
Right.
there's so much shame, and I know that little girl she felt shame, she felt embarrassed, and what I did, I started taking it out on myself, and at 12 years old, I started running away from home. I remember snorting cocaine for the first time at 12 years old. I started going on binges of drinking alcohol, and
At 12?
at 12 years old, and bless my mother's heart, because I put her through a lot of bad things, and being a mother now, I can look back and see, oh my God, my poor mom, the sleepless nights, where's your child? But I don't think that she had the knowledge, or she had the awareness of the things that I was going through.
Right.
So I was arrested for the first time in Daytona Beach for driving without a license at 12 years old. And from there, things just went, they just spiraled out of control.
When did you report that you were getting molested by a neighbor?
So the first time, it was reported when I was 3. But I don't think that anything was really done, so I never received that justice.
Mm-hmm.
I don't recall being put in therapy, or getting the intensive therapy that I probably needed.
Right. And plus, at 3,
so
how can you really talk about exactly what was
Right.
happening? I don't think a 3-year-old
Right.
even has the vocabulary really to tell details.
Yeah, so it wasn't. So I went on and actually missed out on this part. I started getting molested again by my stepfather when I was probably about 10 or 11, and I never told my mom. I was so afraid, and I was so afraid of hurting my mom, and I was so embarrassed. I was so ashamed, but I started blaming myself. And then the drugs and the alcohol and being arrested, all of that came along. But I didn't get justice there because I never told anybody until I was an adult. So I lived with that secret for many years.
You didn't want to hurt her, and you didn't know if she'd believe you, and that probably was afraid to lose her trust as well as his. This happens a lot with kids. And didn't want to make them unhappy, or if she was happy, if she appeared happy because she was married to him, then a lot of kids hold that back.
Yeah, and I think I was afraid. I cared for him a lot. That was the only other father figure that I knew in my life, and I didn't want to lose that.
Right.
Because I remember being in school and seeing all these kids, having their families, having their mother, having their father, and as what I saw as functional families, and I didn't have that.
You do anything to keep it as close to a family unit as you could.
Yes. So I stayed quiet, and eventually they separated for different reasons. But even after they separated, I still continued to see him as my father, and I still continued to go with him, and he continued to molest me. And thankfully, he ended up getting married, and his wife was not okay with him having a relationship with me or my brothers. So he broke off all contact. But I still had to deal with the interpersonal issues and everything that this man did to me. And I think what a lot of individuals go through is, naturally our body reacts to being sexual. That's just human nature.
Mm-hmm.
And I had so much shame because the things that were being done to me, it